I am not by nature a spontaneous person. I want to establish that up front because the entire story hinges on one moment where I acted completely out of character, and I need you to understand how genuinely unusual that was. I am a planner. I make grocery lists sorted by aisle. I have a color-coded calendar that my friends make fun of me for with a frequency that suggests it bothers them more than they let on. I once spent 11 days researching the best brand of bath towels before making a purchase. 11 days for towels. So when I tell you that I did something impulsive on a random Tuesday afternoon in November, I need you to appreciate what a departure that was from my entire established personality. I was at a grocery store in Columbus, Ohio. A regular Tuesday, nothing remarkable about it. I'd come straight from work, still in my work clothes, just needed a few things for the week, moving through my aisle-sorted list with the quiet efficiency of a man who has optimized this particular errand to approximately 19 minutes, including checkout. I was in line at the register when I noticed the woman in front of me. She was maybe 60, small, with the kind of posture that suggested she had once stood straighter, and life had gradually pressed her down an inch or two. She was dressed neatly but thinly for November, a fleece jacket that wasn't quite enough for the cold outside, sensible shoes that were clean but worn through at the side of the left one. She had a small cart of groceries, methodically arranged the way people arrange things when they're going to have to make decisions at the register. And she was doing the thing I have seen people do and never been able to watch without feeling it somewhere behind my sternum. She was counting, quietly, almost imperceptibly, her lips moving slightly as the cashier scanned each item, running a mental tally, tracking the number on the screen against whatever number she had arrived with. When the total came up, $42.43, she went through her wallet with a careful patience that told me exactly what was in it before she finished looking. She put $23 on the counter, mostly ones. Then she counted change, slowly. Then she looked at the screen and she looked at the cashier, a teenager who was looking at the register with the studied neutrality of a kid who has learned not to make situations more uncomfortable than they already are. "I'm sorry," the woman said quietly. "Could we take off the orange juice and the pasta sauce? I think the pasta sauce is—" She was going to put back the orange juice. Something just moved in me. No deliberation, no pro and con list. I reached past her, tapped my card, and paid the balance before either of them had processed what was happening. The cashier looked at me. The woman turned around. I said, the most convincing casual I could manage, "I've got it. Please don't worry about it." She stared at me. I said, just to fill the silence because silence makes me anxious, "My mom loves orange juice too. I'd feel terrible if she had to put it back." Which was both true and also a completely unplanned thing to say. The woman looked at me for another long moment, an expression I couldn't fully read, something between gratitude and a very specific kind of pride that didn't want to be seen accepting help, and then she nodded once and said, "Thank you, son," and took her bags and left. The cashier looked at me. I looked at the cashier. I paid for my own groceries and went home. I thought about her for maybe 2 days afterward, in the background, the way minor moments sometimes linger. Then life moved on and I filed it in the category of things that happened and moved past and don't become stories, until 2 years later when they became a story. Some context about those 2 years. I was working as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Columbus. It was good work, steady, and I was competent at it in the way that I am competent at most things I apply the color-coded calendar to. But I had been thinking, with increasing frequency, about doing something different. Specifically, I had been thinking about a nonprofit I had stumbled across online that did housing assistance work, connecting elderly and low-income residents with resources for home repair, utility support, emergency funds, the kind of organization that operates in the background of a city doing work that doesn't get attention but holds things together. The organization was called Steadfast Columbus. I'd read a profile on them in a local publication and donated a modest amount and signed up for their email newsletter. And then, in classic me fashion, spent the better part of a year thinking about whether I wanted to get more involved without doing anything about it. I finally emailed them about volunteer opportunities in January, about 22 months after the grocery store. They had an intake process for new volunteers, an orientation session, a couple of background check forms, a meet and greet with the program staff, standard nonprofit onboarding. I went to the orientation on a Thursday evening in February, in a conference room in their small office on the east side of Columbus, along with 6 other new volunteers. The program director came in to introduce herself and talk about the organization's work. I recognized her. Not immediately. It was the posture first, something about how she held herself, that quality I'd noticed in the grocery store, the sense of someone who had been pressed down and had straightened back up again, and then her face, and then the worn-through left shoe, though the shoes she was wearing now were different, better. Her name was Gloria Simmons. She was 62 years old. She had been the program director of Steadfast Columbus for 8 months. She told us with the comfortable candor of someone who had made peace with her own history, spent several years in what she called a very hard season after her husband's death in 2019, which had left her with debt she hadn't known existent and a financial situation that had taken her completely apart and required years of rebuilding. She talked about that period without self-pity and without performance, just factual, grounded, the way people talk about hard things when the hard things are genuinely behind them.
She talked about the moments of unexpected kindness he had experienced during those years, and how disproportionate their impact had been, how a small thing when you were at a very low point can feel enormous. She had been in her hard season when I'd seen her at the grocery store. I did the math on the timeline. November, 2 years ago, 8 months before her husband's death anniversary, the height of what she'd later described in a staff newsletter, which I read after the fact, after I'd already started piecing things together, as the year I was most afraid I wouldn't survive. I sat in that orientation for an hour and a half and said nothing about the grocery store. I want to be clear that I went back and forth about this for a significant amount of time. On one hand, what was the point of saying anything? The moment had been anonymous, which had felt right at the time and still did. Revealing it felt uncomfortably like asking for credit, which was the opposite of why I'd done it. On the other hand, the coincidence was so specific and so strange that staying silent felt like its own kind of dishonesty, like carrying information that belonged to a conversation. I did what I always do when I can't make a decision. I made a pros and cons list. The list was not helpful. I called my friend Theo, who is the kind of person I call when the list isn't helping. Theo said without hesitation, "Tell her." I said, "It feels like it undermines the whole point of doing it anonymously." Theo said, "The point of doing it anonymously was so she wouldn't feel obligated to thank you in the moment. You're not in that moment anymore. You're in a completely different moment that is wild and you should absolutely tell her." I said, "What if she doesn't remember?" Theo said, "Orange juice." He had a point.
I waited until I had been volunteering for 6 weeks because I wanted to have a legitimate standing in the organization before I said anything. I didn't want it to seem like the reason I was there. I had a regular shift helping with their client intake process, talking with residents who came in for assistance, helping them fill out applications and navigate the resources available to them. It was good work, the kind that puts your week in perspective. Gloria and I had developed a natural rapport over those 6 weeks. She was warm and direct and funny in the dry way that serious people often are. She had a habit of leaving encouraging notes in the volunteer sign-in binder that managed not to be corny. I liked her immediately and completely, the way you occasionally like people from the very beginning, and that made what I had to say feel simultaneously more and less complicated. I asked if she had a few minutes one evening after my shift. We sat in the small kitchen off the main office. She had tea, I had water. I told her I had something a little strange to tell her, and I wanted to preface it by saying that I wasn't looking for any kind of acknowledgement, and if she'd rather just let it sit between us without making it a thing, I fully supported that. She said, with the expression of someone who has heard a lot of things in this office, "Just say it, Marcus." So I told her, the grocery store, the November, the orange juice, my completely unplanned comment about my mother. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I remember you." I don't know what I'd expected. Maybe that she wouldn't. Maybe that 2 years of a hard season had blurred those specific details. But she said it clearly and immediately, no hesitation. "I thought about that for a long time," she said. "I was so angry at myself that year for being in a position where a stranger had to step in at a grocery store. I had a whole internal monologue about it." She paused. "And then I thought, there's a person out there who just did something kind with no reason to. And I decided to try to be that person for someone else when I could. It sounds simple, but that's a lot of what shifted for me." I didn't know what to say. She smiled. "Also, I really needed that orange juice." I want to be careful about how I frame what happened next because this is not a romance story and I don't want it to sound like one. Gloria Simmons is 30 years older than me, and she became, over the following year and a half, one of the most important people in my life. Not romantically. More like, have you ever met someone who operates on a frequency that yours suddenly makes sense in comparison to? Like finding a tuning fork that matches yours? She became my mentor in a way I hadn't been looking for and didn't know I needed. She pushed me that year to stop circling the edges of a life I actually wanted and start building it. She asked me once, why was I still in a job I described as fine? I said because it was stable. She said, "Is stability a destination or a launch pad for you?" And I've thought about that question approximately 400 times since. I left a construction firm 14 months after that kitchen conversation. I now work full-time for Steadfast Columbus, not as a volunteer, as their director of operations, a position that didn't exist before I came on, and that Gloria and I essentially built together from a proposal I put in front of the board last spring. I make less money than I did. My color-coded calendar is somehow more full than it's ever been. I sleep better than I have in years. There is a woman named Diane who comes into our office on the first Tuesday of every month. She is 74, lives alone, and is on a fixed income that stopped being enough about 2 years ago when her building raised the rent by an amount that I would call unconscionable. But that is entirely legal in Columbus. We help her with utility assistance, and we connected her with a city program that has helped stabilize her rent situation. She brings cookies sometimes. Store brand. The ones in the tray. She brought them the first time apologetically, saying she didn't have much to offer, and I told her that cookies were genuinely the most useful thing anyone had brought to this office in months, which is only a slight exaggeration. Diane is one of 43 regular clients I can name. I know which ones have difficult relationships with asking for help and need an extra minute at the start of the conversation before they relax.
I know which ones want to be treated briskly and practically because efficiency feels more dignified to them than warmth. I know which ones want to talk about their families first and get to the paperwork second. This is the work. This is what the color-coded calendar is for now. I called my mom and told her the whole story. The grocery store, the orientation, Gloria, the job. About 6 months after I came on full-time. She cried, predictably. She is a crier in the best way. She said, "I love that you mentioned me." About the orange juice. I said, "I panicked. I didn't know what else to say." She said, "It's still the best thing you've ever said." She might be right. Here is what I believe. Having turned this whole sequence of events over in my mind more times than I can count, I don't think the universe engineered a specific series of events to teach me a lesson about purpose. I'm not a person who thinks in those terms. I think I made an unplanned decision at a grocery store because something in me recognized something in that woman that I responded to without thinking. I think she carried it forward, and I carried it forward without knowing we were both doing it. And I think the intersection of those two carried things, 2 years later, in an orientation room in East Columbus, was not destiny. It was just what happens when small moments are taken seriously. That's enough of a miracle for me. Gloria retired last spring. There was a party in the office with more people than the office could comfortably hold, which she complained about and was visibly delighted by. She's consulting part-time for 2 other nonprofits and spending the rest of her time with her grandchildren and doing things she described vaguely as things I kept saying I'd do when I had time. I gave a speech at her retirement party that I practiced 4 times and then abandoned at the podium and just said true things without notes. I said that she had taught me that the most useful question you can ask yourself is not, what am I good at, but what can I not stand, not doing. I said that a woman who had been through genuinely difficult things and come through them not diminished but expanded was the most instructive thing I had ever witnessed. I said that she had changed my life and that I was not particularly sorry about it. She told me afterward in the parking lot that it was a good speech. Coming from her, that's a standing ovation. The grocery store is still there. I drive past it occasionally. It's not on my regular route, but Columbus is not a big city and it comes up now and then. I never stop in. I have a different store I go to. Still with the aisle sorted list. Still approximately 19 minutes, including checkout. But every time I pass it, I think about a Tuesday in November, and a woman and an orange juice, and $12.43 that turned out to be, in the long run, the best money I have ever spent. I don't say this to make a point about generosity. I'm genuinely suspicious of stories that frame kindness as a transaction where the kind person ends up winning. That's not what this is. If Gloria had simply taken her groceries home and never crossed my path again, the moment at the register would still have been the right thing to do. The point of it doesn't depend on the outcome. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't grateful for the outcome. I'm grateful for it every single day I walk into that office. To Gloria, and to everyone who carries a small kindness forward, without knowing where it's going.